and I think this is right, that the basic idea behind the phenomenal concept strategy doesn't actually require concepts, which might sound strange because what's a phenomenal concept strategy? How could it not be about concepts? And the book I read recently had an interview on this guy talked about conceptual engineering, but he actually doesn't affirm concepts either, and he doesn't think there's much engineering either going on. Nevertheless, he thinks that. Anyway,
could I ask you this question?
Yeah.
Do you consider the laws of logic, law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, and the law of identity as concepts?
No. So look,
What would they be?
I mean, they're statements we might make. Look, I want to be clear on something, which is that I think a fair amount of our language here, like the things we say about our ideas, about our various intentional states, like our beliefs and desires and so on, and various aspects of those, we often talk in a way, and we talk about the proposition, blah blah blah. Although I don't particularly believe in propositions, we talk in that sort of way, and I'm fine with talking in that sort of way because it's kind of useful. And even though, on my view, we might be committing to things which, or might at least sound like we're committing to things which don't exist. So I think a lot of proposition talk, right? Talk about the proposition is Noah's white. I don't think there's an actual thing there, the proposition that's Noah's white. I don't think that's a thing in the world. Either in the physical world, in minds, or in some abstract realm. Nevertheless, I'm fine with engaging that sort of talk because doing so is quite useful. I don't, and there's and oftentimes it's very difficult to replace that talk with something that doesn't make it look like we're committing something that doesn't exist, on my view. So, if not even not possible. So I guess I don't think a belief is an actual thing, right? I think it may be true to say that someone has a belief, right? Without thereby committing to there being this thing, the belief which they have. That might sound strange, but I mean, whatever. I'm rambling. Idea being, I think a lot of this talk about these mental entities, be they concepts, propositions, ideas, even beliefs. While I don't strictly think that there are like things in the world denoted by those statements, those terms, I'm fine with using that talk because it's quite useful for the purpose we want for it. Anyway.
Well, from when I see people make arguments for something like the laws of logic, they'll say they're mind dependent, they're conceptual, implying that concepts exist. So if you're saying that you don't know if concepts exist, then that kind of commits you to not
Well, I don't
knowing
think.
the law of
I don't think the
non-contradiction
laws.
exists.
Hang on.
And
When you
therefore,
say
you
I'm
couldn't really
not
use
knowing
it,
whether
right?
the law of non-contradiction exists, I don't think there is that, like, there's some entity, the law of non-contradiction. That's different from and independent from, on my view, the issue of whether, the statement, what I just said, is true, right? Say, there are no true contradictions.
Entity.
That
What do
can
you
be
mean
true,
by
regardless
entity?
whether regardless whether there's a thing in the law of non-contradiction.
So, like the law of non-contradiction is an entity, but it's not mind dependent. It's not conceptual.
No, I'm saying there is no such entity, the law of non-contradiction. I mean, there's individual statements that we might make, or I say that there's no
Well, that would
true
mean the laws of
contradiction.
logic just simply don't exist, right?
They're not entities. They're not or anything like that. But the statement can be true, right? It might be true, or at least might assert that there are no true contradictions.
So the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, like P and not P. That I did. That's
not.
You're saying that those are not concepts. That's your position.
They're not things at all. I don't think. So I don't know why we would forget concepts. I mean, even if I affirmed there were concepts, I wouldn't say that they were that either.
Do they exist or do they not exist?
So they don't. There are no such things. That's not. Of course, there's the statements that I might make. I might again say that there are no true contradictions, and that can be true. Of course, we might, even that might be a little bit of an imprecise way of speaking, because whatever.
So you're an alogicalist.
I'm a what?
You don't believe logic exists. An alogicalist.
An alogicalist. So I don't think any of these statements, there's no like proposition or thing, the law of non-contradiction, or anything else. Like, there's no thing, the proposition that snow is white or something. That's not a thing. Nevertheless, we can say snow is white, and we can say there are no two contradictions, and those statements might be true, right? I might just say something correct, and so this is a difference here between talk of the ontology of these statements, or what they express, and whether the statement itself is true. I take it that normally when we're talking about laws of logic and so on, we're really concerned with the latter, whether it's something true or not whether it's this like abstractly existing entity or something like that.
I almost was thinking that maybe you fit in the category of a logical nihilist based on your position.
Yeah, that would be completely wrong.
But
right? Because everything.
The reason why I think I was wrong, because at least the logical nihilist actually, they just don't believe logic holds in complete generality. But they wouldn't say logic doesn't exist.
Yeah, but no,
but in your position here, you seem to be implying that logic doesn't really exist at all.
No, that the laws are not things themselves, but that doesn't mean that the statements can't be true. So in other words, I could think that they hold in complete generality. I could think that there are no true contradictions. I mean, if I want to be precise, I'm going to have to read that in a way which doesn't require that there are propositions that are whatever. And that wouldn't be logical nihilism. I'd be committing to the sort of thing that the nihilist would deny. At least, well, if that's the sort of thing they would deny, that there's some principle like that. So again, I don't want to get confused. The ontology of logical propositions, I don't want to confuse that with, well, whether the statements we might make say that there's no true contradictions, whether that's true. Those, I don't think that stands or falls with what we say about the ontology of the propositions.
Well, let me try to put it in maybe a simple syllogism here. P1, and this is from your position, P1, if concepts don't exist, laws of logic don't exist, or principles of logic, whatever you want to say. P2, concepts don't exist. Conclusion, laws of logic don't exist.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wow.
But to be clear, that doesn't entail, and it's not equivalent to, the conclusion that say the thing that there are no true contradictions. It doesn't entail that's false. That could be true, right? So in other words, the person who affirms the law of non-contradiction, that there are no true contradictions, that I can have that view and think that there's no such thing, the law of non-contradiction. Again, I worry that you're confused between the ontology of the proposition and the facts concerning whether the claims are true. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah, because your physicalist state of mind is that the reason that you only hold for physical, whatever that is.
The proposition is snow is white, and then we can question whether that statement is true.
I mean, you realize what it, when you have someone such as myself or kind of a common layman's person who doesn't
Yeah.
engage in a lot of philosophical talk, and someone says, "Oh, you believe that the Bible there can be a contradiction in the Bible, but you're willing to still believe the Bible over the law of non-contradiction," and so and someone were to criticize that and said, "Ah, that's absurd," but then you were to say, "Well, laws of logic, principles of logic don't really exist."
Those
you
are
realize
independent.
what that
Those
yeah,
are
but you
independent.
realize what that would sound like.
It might
Because
sound
in
it
order
might
to
sound
say,
problematic, but
well,
it's sounding
I
so
would see
is not.
yeah, but
In
see,
this
it's
case,
just
an
completely
indication that it is.
uninformative and actually confusing, because if you're going to insist on applying the laws of logic to something,
Yeah.
then that's the implication that these laws of logic actually exist and are useful. But if you're
Yeah.
saying they don't really
It might
exist,
it might
then
sound
how
like
would
that,
you?
and people
What
might
would the
think that that's an
person?
implication, but would reject that.
Yeah, but I think that they
Or at least
would just kind of at that point kind of dismiss that as absurdity and say, I mean, how can you
they could
critique
quote unquote
something
dismiss it as
using?
absurdity, but
How can you take a principle which we would think exists as a principle, that's concepts within the mind, and try to
right.
use it against someone, but then not really believe it actually exists?
But I'm not, right? So you commit to the the view. You would assent to the fact that there are no true contradictions. Let's suppose that you do, right? That's you affirming the law of non-contradiction. Of course, for the sticklers, I'm going to talk, as I often do, in ways that seem to assume that there are these things, propositions, about which we're discussing. And I grant that that's the way I'm talking. I don't grant that I'm actually into those things. Anyway, now, the point is that you affirm, let's suppose that you do, that there are no true contradictions. I suppose I do too. Perhaps I do. We can still have this conversation about, well, does the Bible commit to there being a true contradiction? And if so, how would you respond to that? Would you accept the Bible, what the Bible says, and reject that there aren't any true contradictions? So you'd affirm that there are some true contradictions. Or would you reject what the Bible says and maintain your belief that there are no true contradictions? And then we can have the conversation, well, if you do the first, you maintain the Bible and your interpretation of it. We can ask, well, how are you interpreting the Bible? All that stuff we can ask about. Independent of that, we can have a conversation about the ontology of laws or propositions. And I don't think what answer we give there, including the answer that I'm giving, bears on that earlier conversation. So I could deny that there are any things, propositions, or laws of logic or whatever, and there's no problem for the earlier conversation about, well, there's a contradiction here and no contradiction. Look, I understand how that might be misleading, or it might sound strange, especially for someone who's a bit more of a layperson on these matters, but it's consistent, and I would have to explain it further, as I've somewhat tried to here, why those things are different. Again, there's a difference between
Well, I'm
the
just not
ontology
sure
of some
anyone
proposition
would
and
even listen to you at that point, to be honest with you.
they might not.
Because yeah, I mean, they'd just be like, okay, well, here you were, and it wouldn't be an issue for you, Friction, because you said that my answer the other day, you didn't really have a problem with. You don't think it necessarily follows what entails there. But if you were, let's imagine that you did say, well, that's absurd. You can't hold to that. I mean, you're rejecting the law of non-contradiction here. It's absurd for you to do that. The person could just equally think, well, it's absurd that you just don't really believe this tool you're using to critique me actually even exists.
No, but I'm not using, look, the criticism isn't using the entity, the proposition that there are no true contradictions.
Well, it's conceptual.
If it did use that, then
concepts within the mind, but you said concepts don't exist. So if concepts
regardless
don't
whether
exist,
it's a mental entity or some other entity, regardless whether you're thinking of it as some mental entity or some other entity, what I'm saying is that the criticism doesn't require thinking that it's some entity at all, right? That's not really relevant to the criticism. What is relevant is whether we think, that statement, there are no true contradictions, is true, whether we think there are no true contradictions or not. And the other things about what the Bible says and so on. And we can have that conversation about those things without even considering whether there is like an actual entity, the law of non-contradiction. That's a separate discussion. And my point is that the negative answer, that there is that's not an actual entity, doesn't undermine the earlier discussion at all. We can still, it was still the case, for example, that you
Well, I think what
affirmed
would
that there are no true
undermine it
contradictions.
would be, hypothetically speaking, if you were to take a real aggressive position against my position, and you were insisting that I was being inconsistent, and that would be
I
where the
could.
problem lie, because then I would just simply level this accusation against you and just say, well, you know what, you don't even really believe concepts exist. Laws of logic are conceptual.
That would just be irrelevant.
Laws of logic don't exist. So I would just say, until you can.
But my criticism
at least
doesn't assume
acknowledge
that the laws exist.
Well, yeah, no, but to me, you kind of have to assume, in order to use it, that they have existence at least in the concepts of the mind.
Again, you're assuming that I'm to make this sort of criticism, I'd have to use the thing, that law. But that's not correct.
Yes.
Nowhere in my description of the criticism was that assumed.
So you're using it, but you're not using it.
But he's saying he can do an internal critique of your view.
Well,
no, it's not even that, right? It could be on his
assuming that the laws of logic exist.
It could be on his view that these things, right? There are no propositions.
At least by your guys.
The same critique could be applied.
I mean, I don't know.
So
I've just never heard the idea. I never heard this position before.
Like, look.
So it just doesn't make sense to me, because if you're going after someone's worldview, but then you're saying the laws of logic don't really exist, then I find that hugely problematic for you to even go after anyone's worldview.
It's not relevant. So, I mean, again, I can understand the confusion, but it's confusion. I've been trying to explain why it is. Let me give another example. Suppose someone says, I think snow is white. And then they also say, nothing's white, right? There's nothing in the world that's white. I guess they also think there is snow, right? Now, I could point out that their view is inconsistent. Well, if there's something, if there's snow, there's some snow, and snow is white, then something's white, because that snow has to be white. But you're also denying that anything's white. That's inconsistent. And they could respond to that however they choose to. Maybe they accept the contradiction. Maybe they revise their view in some way or another. Now, it's a separate question whether the proposition snow is white, that's some abstractly existing proposition or concept, right? I think it's a separate question whether there's like whiteness as a concept is a thing that exists, and so on for snow and predication, whatever. Now, point being that we can engage in these criticism, internal critique, whatever, without making assumptions about or even mentioning these other issues about the ontology of propositions or of concepts. And I can, it seems to me, make those same criticisms. It's like, oh, you just contradicted yourself, or your view is inconsistent here when you said there's snow is white, but there's nothing that's white. And also, I could just deny, and maybe they would deny as well, that there is some entity, the proposition that snow is white, or some entity, the concept of white, or some entity, the concept of snow. The criticism doesn't require the existence of such things, it seems to me. And so it's just a separate discussion. Again, I don't want to confuse the statements we're making, what we're like committing to, the views that we have. strictly speaking, I think views are entities, but whatever, separate thing. With the ontology of propositions or concepts, I don't think one is the same as the other.
Detroyer, do you
That was a
accept
bit
the
clear.
Do you accept the disquotation principle or no?